So let's take advantage of this here, because we ended up never talking about this here. What are the options you have when you think about guitar construction that you can even show besides standing? Of course, let's go, man. You can't put it here for you to show, right? Yes, let's go, man. You talked about the thickness of the neck. That's right. If you want to leave it more upright so it doesn't hit there. What are the options you have? You said, well, it became a more modern Ibanez neck, right? That more, but it was an accident.
It was an accidental thing. Nowadays, whoever asks me, I do it on purpose. Then I structure the neck in a different way.
So, let's go. What option does a person have when choosing a neck for the instrument? And why should a person choose one or the other? In terms of thickness, width, size, go ahead, give a lesson on that.
I have some options that are kind of standard. So I draw a lot of inspiration from necks that worked well, shapes that were successful. For example, this guitar here, the Biscuit, it has, by default, a neck that resembles the Gibson from the 60s, which is a thinner neck. It's a classic neck, but it's a bit thinner than the older necks.
When you say thin, you mean like...
thickness here, right?
Right, thickness, right? The famous slim taper.
Exactly.
It's the best neck Gibson has ever made to this day, man.
Exactly.
It's not the one we call a baseball bat, right? No.
That one was...
like the ES335, the one that's thicker, right? ES4, in the 50s then.
Yeah, N50, that neck is round.
It's literally that shape. It looks like a U shape.
Yes.
So thick that it is. So show here too. Here, so I can ask some questions. Here, you go ahead.
Right.
So we have the possibility of being a more...
thinner, thicker,
right? The grip, exactly. And there's also the possibility of having a wider neck.
This part about widths, I keep the standard.
But there's also the possibility. What are the possibilities?
In terms of width?
Yes, in terms of width.
Here, for example, nut width. You have some standards that are thinner. Here it's about 41.5 meters. It's an easy conversion, 42 meter, 43 meter, 44 meter. This changes the musician's perception regarding the spacing between the strings. So there are people who prefer it a little closer together and others who prefer it a bit more spaced out. I, by default, use 43 millimeters, which is a more permissive spacing. I can work with all bridges. The Floyd Rose lock nut, for example, for those who request it, without needing to alter the instrument's design.
Okay, I understand. So if someone wants a wider neck, you don't do it.
Depending on the type of hardware they're going to use, it can even be easy. But for example, if you want a wider neck like the Floyd Rose, it will depend on the lock nut here. It has a standard measurement, so I can't deviate much from that measurement to develop the design.
But which guitar would have a wider neck?
None of mine.
No, from models you can mention to the audience.
The Les Paul itself has 44, if I'm not mistaken. The Gretches are a little wider here.
In terms of playability, do you think this impacts anything? Does it make it harder to play?
For those with small hands, having this wider will make a difference because in that grip of the hand on this back part of the neck, having this wider sometimes gets a little in the way. So, some people like it a bit wider. Some people like it a bit thinner.
The classical guitar usually is wider.
It's much wider. This is big.
What would it be?
46, 48, is that it? I think it's 48 if I'm not mistaken here, right? The width from end to end here, if I'm not mistaken, Funch is 48, but there's an explanation for that, right? The technique for classical guitar is completely different from the technique for electric guitar, right? The way you hold the neck, how you develop it. So, there's an explanation. And it's also an inheritance from classical guitars the way they are.
But if you take a little folk guitar, a Taylor, you see that thin neck, right? It's already fresher than my guitar, which must be from 42, 43, right?
It's already fresher. Usually it's 44. Most guitars are made with 44.
I see, okay. Steel, right, guys? Just to specify. So we're talking here, man, about the nut, right? The width of the nut. And we're going to influence the width of the neck, right? That's it.
No, thickness and width is a combination. A little wider, a little thicker, you'll have a different feel from a little thinner and a little slimmer.
I mean, do you know why I'm trying to focus on this, man? Because those who are watching often have never even stopped to think about this. Sometimes the person hasn't had the experience of picking up various instruments on their own and testing them and saying, wow, what a difference. Because my dream was to have a Gibson S335. The day I played one, I found it very thick, like a big piece of bass drum, you know? I don't know if there are some that are more adapted or not. Do you know? So I'm even going to bring an old guest here. We brought Ricardo Rodriguez, Ricardo from Yahoo. So Aspira, he has a 335, and he said that you played one that's a 50s model. That's why you found that neck thick. He has one. I think it's in the studio, which has a slim taper neck, which is buttery to play. Maybe it was the year of the model. For example, I've played an R9, and I found it horrible because it had a 50s neck. Man, it was a bucket of cold water. I said, wow, to play the R9. I played it, and I said, it's because I wanted to play, right? I wanted to because of Eric Altensch. But his is the La Slim, right?
Yeah, and there are people who measure too. There are people who say, hey man, Beck, slim down this neck for me.
Do you want to see it too? One that for me was a disappointment. That custom from Zach Wilde when he was with Gibson. His neck, it's huge. Man, it's huge. I played it and said, damn, man, horrible.
We took it to adjust there, and the neck is gigantic. But also the guy's hand is, I don't know, 2 or 3 times bigger.
I have big hands, man, but I got used to playing guitars with a neck that's more thinner, more comfortable. And then to move away from that, man, it's very complicated. You end up with a thicker neck. So let's go. We talked about thickness. We talked about width. And man, the fretboard, right? Which is the first layer here, isn't it?
Yes, it's the wood that goes on top of the neck, right? The neck is usually made of a different wood, and the fretboard is usually a harder wood, right?
And this wood, in terms of playability, does it have any influence, in your opinion?
It can have an influence because working with harder or softer wood on the neck can stiffen or soften the neck. And when the neck is softer or more rigid, you will feel it in your grip. When you do a bend, a softer neck will generally help you with the bend. A harder neck won't help you as much with the bend. So you can take 2 identical guitars, which have different material densities in the neck, and feel that one is harder and one is softer. This might be related to this combination, or it might be related to the density of the woods used here, for example. Here is mahogany and here is rosewood. Does this one also have rosewood? Same thing, same configuration, but I could have a much denser rosewood and a much denser mahogany and get a completely different neck response. I understand. So the material also influences the feeling of being softer or lighter. Then there are other factors as well. A thicker neck will naturally be a bit stiffer. A thicker fretboard will stiffen the neck. So all these small construction details will influence what the musician feels in their hand later on. So also being aware of what you want. When someone comes to order an instrument from me, all of this is adjustable. So being a little aware of, well, I want a softer neck, okay, then we go one way. Oh no, I like the neck to be as stable as possible, as stiff as possible, because that's my style, so we go another way.
And do you think the people who come to you already have this high level of awareness?
Not everyone, but quite a few people do. They already have the level of awareness, right?
Because this is extremely important. And there are many people who play for years and years and aren't necessarily interested in this. So you are the kind of person who wants to have a guitar made by a luthier, because that's a specific profile, right? There are people who have the profile like, I just want to buy branded guitars and that's fine, right? You don't have any enmity with anyone. No. I'm friends with everyone. But anyway, if the person doesn't have this knowledge, you will also patiently guide them in the best way, right?
There are many people who come without this knowledge base to order an instrument, and I develop with the client everything they need to know. Sometimes it doesn't even occur to them that the tighter radius works one way and a wider radius works another way.
So talk about that, a wider or tighter radius. What is that?
Well, the radius E of the fretboard is the curvature of the top part of the wood of the fretboard here in the front.
So it's quite flat, right?
I usually use 12, 14, and 16, not much less than that.
What's the difference between them?
So, the smaller the radius value, the more rounded this surface is, right? This surface is more round. This here is a cylinder, right? In most of the guitar's frets, this here is a cylinder. So this cylinder has a radius.
You mean here the part?
The front part.
Front? Okay.
The front.
Why is it a cylinder? Didn't understand.
Why is it a cylinder? Because this fretboard wood here, this part is radiused in a cylindrical shape. There are some that are radiused in a conical shape, which is where that multi-radius fretboard comes in, right?
But here the shape isn't cylindrical, right?
Visually it isn't, but the surface of the fretboard is a section of a cylinder, let's say.
Ah, I see. It's just a small piece of that circle. Here I can see a cylinder cut as if it were in half.
Imagine a cylinder that has a radius of this size here. The front part of the fretboard is more or less like that.
Okay, got it. It's like a cylinder cut in half.
Exactly. A part of it is cut. Imagine there's a lump here and a part is cut off. I see. Okay. So it has different radius measurements. So the larger the radius, the flatter this surface becomes, the more flattened this surface is. So what's the difference? Generally, with tighter radii, the adjustment is a little higher. There's an issue related to the bend, right? The bend has a tolerance with tighter radii, whereas with wider radii, you can lower it a bit more and have the bend work the same way. It crosses a horizon here on the fret that at a certain point, even without any unevenness, the string won't work in that region where you're doing the bend. So there are some physical limits, right, which have some technical explanations that are quite complex, you know, where tighter, E, and wider radii will respond differently. Tighter, rounder radii generally fit the hand better. People really like them. They say, wow, a 9.5 radius. When you place your hand here, the hand closes nicely, right? Wider radii are more flat.
This one here, yours, is really quite small, the neck. Compared to, for example, a Les Paul or a Gibson F335 is much smaller.
This one has a 14 radius, if I'm not mistaken. 12 or 14, I need to take a look, but I think it's 14. And the neck is a thinner neck. The neck is a standard. Closer to a Stratocaster, thinner. So, there are all these differences that are detailed, but when the person is ordering the instrument, even for them to realize that there are various factors that can influence the final result. And the person has to be sure of what?
Of how it will turn out. Because once it's ready, there's no point, right, dude? And it's even cool for the person to play. Hey man, play this one. See if you don't find it cool.
Yes, yes. I have some instruments at the store that I give to the person to play, and they will say, no, this one is nice. This one I didn't like as much. The neck could be a little thinner, a little thicker. Anyway, that also depends on each person. And I give the person total freedom to customize this on the instrument.
It's because the flatter neck is more of a guitar thing, more modern, more...
Usually Ibanez, Nexon, right?
RG, those guitars, right? And then, for example, my Fender Strat, it's a little more rounded, right?
Exactly, exactly. Then you see that when you pick up a guitar like an Ibanez, besides the shape of the neck, you feel that in the front. When playing in the front, there's a difference.
It's flatter, right? Do you ever make guitars with a compound radius?
I've tried, and by hand. Manually, I don't really like the result. I think it never really reaches a nice place. So it's a process that can be done, but I think it should be done in another way, more machined, something that delivers more precision.
Thank you for watching this segment of the Starling Cast. You can watch the full episode here in the video description. And take the opportunity, if you're a guitarist, to join the largest virtual school in Brazil, exclusively for guitarists, by clicking on the QR code or in the video description. I'll be waiting for you there.